action. We exist to help people go deeper into God, so that we can go deeper into the brokenness of the world in God's redemptive power. Um, and I think it feels clear to all of us that the world that we live in continues to be very, very broken. So these sounding seminars that we do from time to time are just time set apart to consider topics that matter for the life of the church, topics that matter for our own discipleship as Christians, or topics that are particularly germane um, in our cultural moment. And so today, this sounding seminar hits on all three of those things. What's going on? What's the call to the church? What's going on in our culture? And how am I to live? So welcome to you. Glad that we can be together. Um, uh, just to draw your attention to a couple of things coming up for those of you who live in the Metro Washington area. This coming Saturday, we have this beautiful opportunity to get out in nature and enjoy God's creation, find some refreshment by doing an arboretum walk. There'll be some information about that in the chat. And then basically, actually a month from today, we're going to be joined by the Reverend Daryl Ford. He's a dear brother of ours and friend of ours from Atlanta, Georgia, and he's going to be doing another sounding seminar on reflecting on the murder of George Floyd a year later, and where's the church at, and what does the church need to be about? So invite you to participate in that as well. But today we're picking up a bit of a different topic. Today we're talking about how then shall we live, recognizing our moment and the call for Christians. And I'm delighted to be joined by my friend and brother, Josh Yates. It's been a long time since I've called you Dr. Yates, but I suppose in this context, Josh, that is actually appropriate. Josh is the executive director of the Ormond Center at Duke University. Josh, what is the Ormond Center at Duke University?
Yeah, well, first, Bill, great to be with you, and a hello to a number of faces from Duke University I see on this call, as well as other friends in the Coracle network. Yeah, the Ormond Center is a center at Duke Divinity School that has a very simple mission. Our mission is to help churches and communities work together to bring thriving, or as we'll talk about, I hope today, shalom to their communities.
That's great. And before that, you were at University of Virginia, both teaching as well as, and you still run a thing called Thriving Cities. What is Thriving Cities all about?
Yeah, so Thriving Cities is a project that started as an academic project at the University of Virginia that started to try to figure out this question: what does it mean and what does it take to thrive in our cities, right? We probably are aware that for the first time in human history, more people live in urban environments than rural. And as a global phenomenon, that is only growing exponentially. So that the question of human flourishing, human thriving, what we define, what we mean by that word, how we work it out on the ground, the barriers to that question, who gets to thrive in our places. These are all the kinds of questions we were beginning to take up as a set of researchers. And then as we began doing our research in communities, lots of folks on the ground, practitioners, churches, people in all sectors who are struggling with those same questions began to ask us to say, hey, can you help us both define this, expand our imaginations, but also can you help us develop what we call the mindsets, the tool sets, and the skill sets we need to work for thriving in communities?
That's great. Last softball question before we dive in. You are a sociologist. What does a sociologist actually do?
Well, I always like to start by saying that, a lot of sociologists play professional sports. So if you remember when you were in college, who took the sociology classes, right? And there, so, that's one kind of funny way to say it. But in reality, a sociologist is a social scientist of a kind. And our focus is on social life. So what are the dynamics, the forces of social change, the structures and systems that shape our places, our daily lives and habits, and as something that's important to the kind of sociology that I do as a cultural sociologist, the kind of moral systems, visions of the good, visions of justice that are either we're aware of, that are shaping us, or we're practicing, or oftentimes we're unaware of, that we're complicit in or shaped by.
It's great. It's helpful. Well, Josh, it's great to have you, brother. And thanks to the Ormond Center, who's partnering with us today on this. And then as you have questions, particularly for Josh, for this discussion, go ahead and put those, just chat them privately to Carla Petty. She'll be compiling them and we'll be talking about them. If you have comments along the way, feel free to put those in the chat. So let me offer a word of prayer, and then we'll dive into how should we then live. God, thank you so much for this opportunity to consider such a question. Thank you so much for the privilege of being alive now and being able to listen for your call to us. So we ask that you would guide our conversation today, and and that we would be given guidance on how to be faithful as disciples and faithful in this moment. This we ask in the name of Jesus. Amen. Amen. Well, Josh, heck of a year. If we think back to March of 2020, I would guess that the only thing that we could have known was going to be difficult last year was we knew that we were coming into a contentious election. We knew that. But we didn't see a pandemic coming. We didn't realize that there would be such important racial dynamics that were being addressed over the summer and ongoing. Don't know that we realized that the election was going to end up being as contentious as it was, with the fallout of it. And then 2020 ended, but the dynamics of a very tumultuous year did not, right? January 6th, ongoing conversations and important conversations about race, ongoing issues of the pandemic, and then most recently, of course, the verdict in the trial of Derek Chauvin. And we are still feeling the reverberations. We're still living in them of 2020 and even now. And I would just love to hear your perspective of, when you look at the last 15 months or so in the United States, like, what are you seeing? What are the forces at work?
Yeah. Well, I think the way I've come to see it is that what COVID did was in many ways illuminate long-standing crises in our country that some people were very well aware of and others maybe not so much. So I sort of think of two things, right? It both illuminates long-standing kinds of challenges in our society that were like fault lines already there. And it, in many ways, not only revealed them, it widened them. And it also showed how many, or if not many or most, perhaps even all, those crises are actually connected to one another. And you certainly see that when you're on the ground in communities. So that what began as a health crisis, right? When you start looking on the ground in communities and you see who's most impacted by those communities, right? You follow that line. You see how it's connected to issues of race and inequality, right? And you can keep following. You begin to see the webs of interconnection between these issues. So I think, one of the really interesting, the first thing I'd say about it is that what COVID has done is it put in bold a number of issues, and then started to show how they're connected. And then finally, I would add, I think it's done more than anything. I mean, it's like an incredible global social experiment with human beings in terms of our behavior. But I think it has also created openings. I don't want to be any more optimistic than that. I think it's created openings for people to see some of these challenges with fresh eyes or in a new way. And we see a number of social movements and very forms of protest movements and other kinds of activism that I think have been fueled by these possibilities. So it's, I suppose at the end, you might say it is hastening where certain things were already leading, but it's brought that future more quickly to us. And it's opening possibilities for engaging those. Now, whether or not we will take those opportunities, whether or not those opportunities will mature into healthy, holistic kinds of ways of addressing these interrelated problems is yet to be seen, but I think that's the possibility.
It's interesting. So 2020 is a year of revealing, but also showing the interconnectedness of what is being revealed. Yeah.
And making the future come more quickly to us.
I hadn't thought about that. In what ways do you see it making the future come more quickly to us?
Yeah, well, so I can be very concrete on that, and then maybe a little less concrete. But the concrete way is like, look, how many organizations, take higher education. I'll just use this because I'm in higher education. Many universities were the kinds of jumps they had to make this last year, online education, down to like how they're going to do their business plan. I mean, right down to the most concrete things like their business plans. They expected these kinds of changes within the next 10 years, and suddenly they had to make them within 6 months. Right. So that's like one and you can multiply that across multiple sectors, right? The same sorts of dynamics. But back to these issues of these long-standing fault lines that were there, right? Like, fault lines in our sort of the tectonic plates of our society. Those have been widened to the point where society, can't ignore them, in at least this moment. And so I think in that way, it also accelerated things that people thought would take a little bit longer to come to a head. They're coming to a head now.
Your sense that people will be thinking about and writing about 2020 for a very long time?
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, it's going to be, I just think in terms of my kids' lives, right? Just think very practically, the way that that's marked an important moment in their lives that will, so it's not going to be, people will not only be writing about this moment. I think like it's going to have a generational effect that a generation will carry with them.
Quite a moment to be living through, quite a time to be alive, right? Yeah, whether it just be as a human being, or whether it be as a Christian, or whether it be as a leader of some sort, or somebody who's trying to do some good in the world. It's quite a moment. One would like to think that in moments like these, that the Christian church sort of rises to the occasion and becomes this beacon of hope and goodness and help. But that image feels muddled. It feels muddled. It feels murky. As you think about this season that we're living in now, and as you observe the church, what sorts of things are you seeing about the church and the culture's engagement with the church?
Yeah. So let me start actually kind of bridging the first question to this one. Remember how I mentioned that I think COVID has shown us the interconnections of these crises, and they're compounding one another. Pope Francis has a great quote in his encyclical Laudato Si, where he's talking about this kind of social challenges of our moment and the environmental challenges of our moment. And he says, like, our temptation is to treat these as different things, as separate problems. But his argument is that he says we are in fact not facing two separate challenges. They actually share the same spiritual crisis at their core. And that one of the things that is required in anything that is going to help us address these challenges is to understand that they are one thing. They're integrated. And any approach has to be integrated in our approach. And so I wanted to start there, because I think when you think then, well, where would we find that? Where would we go in our society? Where would we think we could go in our society to find an integrated vision of justice, of righteousness, of a concern for human dignity, a concern for the health of the planet, right? where do you think you would, where would we like to think we could go? We'd like to think the church. We'd like to think that the Christian faith offers that integrated, holistic view. I mean, that's for me what I think the gospel is about. All right. Well, if that's true, how many of us on this call would feel like you could look to your local church for that vision, or the church more broadly for that vision? Now, there are absolute exceptions to what I'm saying. We all know of places that are bringing that beautiful, holistic, beloved community vision. Okay, so I don't want to say that they don't exist; they do. But I would say, by and large, when we look around, most of us find our churches, and again, the church broadly, at the very least, their response disappointing, demoralized, dispirited, and every bit as fractious as the wider society. And I think that raises a bunch of questions for us. And I think that has profound implications in this moment for those of us who follow Jesus Christ.
Well, when you talk about 2020 as being a year of revelation, of making some dynamics that have been present very, very clear, it does seem that relative to the church, one thing that it has made clear is that the church is seemingly as polarized as our culture is, right? That very, very rarely do you find a church community that is holding together in spite of the forces that are pulling us apart. Would you agree with that?
No, 100%. And in fact, I would probably, I might even go further. I'll throw this out there as at least a thought. Not only does the church mirror the wider society, in many cases, the church has been, has itself been guilty of creating a lot of that.
So what do you see in terms of people's interaction with the church right now? What are you observing? In our conversations, you mentioned three sort of responses. I'd be curious to hear those.
Yeah, sure. Okay, this. So I'll give a kind of armchair sociology of American religious life here, and understand when I do this, I'm talking in like the most kind of gross, large categories. Each category contains a multitude of universes within them, but I do think, in my experience and the things that I'm seeing all the time, you could more or less break down American Christianity into three basic camps. Okay. Yeah. The first camp, I would say, is doubling down in a kind of religious nationalism, of the kind that, I think tends to have been on the side of Trump and that sort of thing. And I think they're hardening in that position. And we saw it on the Capitol steps, not long ago. I think that there is another third that are leaving the church probably about as fast as they possibly can, both because of the first third and because it just doesn't seem relevant to their lives in any way, or it just it either seems out of step or it doesn't have, it's not life-giving. It's just not in that sense relevant. That's what I mean. I don't mean like culturally relevant. I mean life-giving, life directing, in any way. And they're going to various forms of spirituality and, that sort of thing. And they're mostly young. They're mostly younger. There's also a generational, thing playing out here, of course. And then there's a last third. And these are people who I think are desperately trying to hold on. They believe in their faith. They believe, they might fall on the spectrum from more conservative, more progressive, but they're confused too. They're hurt. They're confused. They're more and more, they find themselves asking themselves hard questions. And I think that by the way, I do want to step aside from the particularly Christian story here and say that is not unique to religious people. all of our institutions and communities are suffering the same kinds of problem where the inherited playbooks aren't working anymore. Right? The status quo of way of arranging things, or at least, I mean, we could argue they're maybe working for a few, but for most people, they're really not working, which is why you see like off the charts mental health crises of all kinds, right? We can go down all the symptoms, right, that we can check off. So I just wanted to do an aside that it's not unique to Christians, but I do think that within the Christian experience, there are a lot of folks, and I would put myself in there, who wake up every day and read the headlines and see what's happening and just sort of scratch my head and say, how did we end up here? And how can the faith that I believe that speaks life to the world is so muted to the point where I even like, can I still hear it? Do I still see it being lived out? Where is that? How can I be a part of that?
Yeah. It was interesting in that recent was it Gallup or Barna? I can't remember, but the very widely touted statistic that for the first time in really ever since the record's being kept, that less than 50% of Americans define themselves as affiliated with a local body of faith. What was interesting about that was that much of that got reported focusing on the church, but it actually wasn't just the church. It was identify themselves as members of a church, synagogue, or mosque, right? And that gets to the sort of the larger general theme here, which is this is not just a Christian phenomenon. This is an American phenomenon.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, so you've got in your three categories there, you've got folks who are sort of doubling down into what you might call neo-fundamentalism, right? And perhaps, I'll just leave it there. And then you've got folks who are saying, I want nothing to do with this whatsoever, and that is a particular dynamic amongst the young. And then you've got folks who are sincere in their faith, confused, wondering what to do and wanting to do something and not exactly sure how to do it, right? They're not going to give up on their faith, but they're not sure who to turn to live it with, or even how to express it themselves in this very tumultuous environment. Well, so I've been reflecting. I love Jesus. I love like how I understand the kingdom.
I think he loves you too, Bill.
Think so? Are you sure about that?
Yeah, I've read that somewhere.
And I've been thinking quite a bit about. Golly, so much of what sometimes is perceived as Christianity in the public sphere doesn't really reflect much that I think of when I think about either Jesus or the kingdom of God or the gospel or whatever. And I've kind of seen there seems to be that there needs to be some sort of recovery of the beauty of what the Christian message actually is, as opposed to the caricature of what it has become. And I find myself thinking about the Sistine Chapel in Rome. It's beautiful ceiling painted by Michelangelo. But over the centuries, it became completely obscured by years and years and years of soot and dust and dirt and grime, so that you couldn't even barely see the darn thing. But then about 2 decades ago, they cleaned it all off, and they took several years to restore it. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh my gosh, that is beautiful. I'm wondering if we could talk about maybe a restored understanding of what Christianity actually offers and why that's needful now. Like, what is the beautiful invitation of the kingdom of God that is hard to see, but is actually needed? What do you think? We've talked a lot of, we've diagnosed some things. What do you think the prescription is? What do we need going forward? So this is where we talk about how shall we then live, right?
Yeah.
In this moment.
Well, I'll just speak, I'm not, I'll speak personally and see if this can be, if I can commend this to others. But this is the path I'm on. Okay. I think that one route to that restoration, if you will, that restoring the true, the full image of the gospel, the whole gospel, which needs to overcome, I'll just mention things like dualism that is so pervasive in our theology, white supremacy, the conflation of our church with our nation, all those sorts of very deep American sins, as it were. I think that there is a path that I think offers a way towards that restoration. And that's what I call the path of shalom.
Mm-hmm.
I think the Old Testament concept of shalom is a really helpful antidote to our culture at this moment. This is a word that is often translated in the Bible as peace. And I think that is right as far as it goes, but it doesn't go nearly as far enough. I think that word, if we just call it peace, makes it sort of like we're not there's no hostility between people or something. Like that's shalom. That's not what the Old Testament picture of shalom is. I think the Old Testament picture of shalom is actually a complex of interconnected ideas. So this is what makes it both beautiful and rich, but also hard to describe in a kind of one go. But I'll try. There's a great image, by the way. There's a book recently that came out called A Paragon, which is a wonderful book I would recommend. It's a story about a Palestinian and a Jewish Israeli, and the story of their lives in the midst of all of the struggles and various things in that conflict. But a paragon is a Greek word for a shape with infinite number of sides. And I think shalom is a concept like that. It is something that has a number of different, an infinite number of angles on it, but it's one thing. And so what are those things? When you look at it in the Old Testament, it evokes issues of wholeness, of well-being and welfare, of harmony, peace, yes, peace, but peace and justice, righteousness and justice, completeness, mutuality, and all of those things integrated. All of those things integrated. And so my quick way of summarizing that is in this image that probably most of us have heard of right relationship, of living together in right relationship between God and yourself and God, self and other, and self and yourself, right? It is an integrated form of living that is in right relationship, anchored in the first relationship was with God, that informs how to be related rightly to everything else. And I think the concept of shalom helps us to regain that whole gospel understanding, to fill in and help us overcome those dualisms, help us overcome those false oppositions around race and class and other things. It helps us overcome and not only overcome, but then stitch together in a holistic way. And the last thing I would say about it is that, well, I'll say two more things if I can. The first is that it's both personal. It's both shalom is both an incredibly impersonal kind of concept, and also it's a social one, and it connects the person to the social, to the community. And so I think that's a really important thing, because I think in our society that's so highly individualistic, we need a way of recovering that as they say these days, the I to the we. And then one more thing, Bill, if I can.
Yeah, please.
And that is, and this is really important. Shalom is a word for us that heals by cutting. And here's what I think. Here's what I think I mean by that. It'd be really easy to embrace a concept like shalom as an ideal. Like all those things I've mentioned, who wouldn't want those things? Those are great things. But I think just like C.S. Lewis talks about the surgeon's knife, there are parts of us as individuals, as we all know, and parts of our churches and parts of our society that need the surgeon's knife. And so the word shalom, if we're really living into it, it's going to cause us to say no to certain things. It's going to cause us to resist certain things. It's going to cause us to have to challenge ourselves where we've said yes to things we should say no to.
Any examples?
Well, I think there's all kinds of examples that, again, go from very personal to the more communal. But I would say that, questions of power, the way that we have conflated American Christianity, especially white American Christianity, has conflated itself with the American way, with American power around the world and at home. And I think we see, we see in a lot of places where we have struck a kind of Faustian bargain with power, and not resisted where we needed to resist in terms of for justice. We've given up justice for power. And so I think there are ways that challenges us.
So if we have this question, how should we then live? And one of your answers, which we're going to unpack a little bit more fully here, one of your answers is pursue shalom, right? And all that it means. Part of what you're saying is that an important first step to pursuing the shalom is to do the introspection and confession of where I have not been a person who has always brought that, or where my congregation has not been a congregation that's always brought that, right? So part of what you're saying is before I get active, I actually need to get repentant. Is that true?
Absolutely. In fact, as one learns about what shalom, as one learns and lives into shalom, these things will become clearer. And I think you're right. I think that the path to repair, which is a key aspect of shalom, what has been broken that needs to be repaired, the pathway to repair begins with repentance.
So what we need now is shalom, like shalom as an alternative to what we are all experiencing in terms of both inequities as well as divisiveness, and we need shalom. And as you mentioned, Josh, this is in two places, right? There's there's me as a person pursuing that, and then there is whatever group that I'm a part of pursuing that as well. In this case, we're talking about the church. So could you just spend a minute or two talking about how does an individual in society pursue shalom, being a shalom bringer? And then secondly, how do you think the church needs to be involved in that? And any examples of those things, like from your own experience, would be great. Sure. Not so much your personal experience, but things that you've seen. Because I know you've seen this. I know you've seen this around the country.
Yeah, well, let me also just start by saying, look, I'm on this journey. I'm learning, right? I mean, I can report from my journey to learn, lean into, and live what I understand shalom to be. And again, I just want to state again that shalom for me is a path back to a full, holistic, integrated understanding of the gospel. That's what, for me, what shalom is allowing us to reapproach. It's your Sistine Chapel image. But and I also want to say that, again, I want to stress one other thing. Well, maybe this is partly answering your question. To do this, in my experience, requires not just changing how we think about things, but doing. And in fact, often, not always, but often the way we change how we think is what we do. Right? So practicing, putting yourself into doing things with your hands, doing things in relationship. So at a very personal level, I don't think you can really lean in and learn or live into what the call of shalom, as I like to talk about it, just by reading about it, or even just by praying about it in the way we typically think of prayer. I think it has to be lived in practice. It has to be lived out loud.
Yeah. I was thinking about that the other day, about certain sort of deeper spiritual truths that sound so very good, and I know important, but man, it is a whole different thing when you actually have to go through it in your own life. I guess there are a lot of examples, but the one I'm thinking of is, learning to encounter God in all things when your immediate context is really, really sucky. It's like encountering God in all things. Oh yes, please. I sign me up for that, until you actually have to do it in a context that you don't want to do it in. And so it's the
Absolutely.
same idea with shalom, is what you're saying. It's beautiful to understand it and talk about it and whatever, but it is a whole nother thing when you're actually trying to incarnate it
Yep.
in your context.
I'll give you a concrete example that I'm struggling with right now, and I have the
Is
suspicion
it the difference between Duke and UNC now that your son is going to UNC, but you work
well,
with Duke? Is that it?
my ACC loyalties are all scrambled for sure. But no, I'll tell you the thing I'm struggling with right now, and I'm not alone in this. I know the Sabbath. I don't mean Sunday exactly. I mean Sabbath, in the deep understanding of that word. Sabbath is a key shalom word, right? I'll just confess, you're all my closest friends now, right? This is our small group here. I have a hard time not making my work the center of everything I do. Right? I mean, everything. And I think like one of the things I'm having to learn was what does it mean to Sabbath? What does it mean to live into Sabbath? So I think that at a very personal level, that's a very concrete example of a kind of practice.
Yeah.
That itself, if you know the Joshua Abraham Heschel book on Sabbath, is what I'm talking about, by the way. Yeah. That understanding of Sabbath. And at a collective level, I think that I want to give us a couple concrete examples of this, but I think, the language of Jubilee is really interesting as another kind of Old Testament imagery that people are putting into practice around debt forgiveness, for example. Right? There are ways in which our economy, our economic systems are ordered that are out of order, that are sort of out of whack. And things like Jubilee offer not just a nice idea, but actual things we might consider doing and putting to practice. So there's a really good friend of mine named Kim Tan, who's written a book and he and his community, he works with folks all around the world, are putting into practice and living in these communities of Jubilee, with business, with government, like a whole bunch of things. And it ranges from everything from, like I said, debt, how we understand debt in our world, to issues of, incarceration, a whole range of things. But let me give one beautiful example, if I can, of where I've seen this sort of play out on the ground in communities. Because, one of the great things of my vocation has allowed me to travel to cities and communities, both rural and urban, all around this country and other countries, and to see the incredible stories where people actually are. They might not necessarily use the language of shalom, but they're living out the work of shalom in their places in like really powerful ways. And I want to give you one example that comes from Indianapolis. Okay. So I have a friend, her name is Joanne Taft. She runs an art center that's actually faith-based, but and open to lots of folks. It's not just Christian art. And it's a bunch of local, it's a wonderful place that is a home and venue to local artists. And they were having conversations with a set of neighborhoods and local artists. And they were beginning to hear over and over again how local art, place-based art, place-making art is often a precursor, as beautiful and wonderful as it is, because it activates spaces. It's just, it's actually a great expression of the beautiful in our communities, and artists who have a kind of a concern for social practice can use their art form to really make places in our communities come alive. We all know how we're nourished by the visual arts in a sense. But it also turns out that when that is done without an understanding of context, they often become the precursor to gentrification and dislocation. Right? As they activate spaces, people want to live there. Well, who has the ability to come and live there? Right? People with means. The people who were in these places before, oftentimes end up being displaced.
Yeah.
And so they were having this discussion. Well, how do we be responsible? How do we practice our craft, our art, as expressions of our faith, of expressions of the beautiful in the world, which is surely part of Shalom. But how do we do that in such a way that doesn't lead to injustice? Right? And so they started comparing notes and going back and forth with one another. And someone said, well, one of the things we don't want to do is lose the cultural heritage and memory of this place. And so they started, well, maybe we could do a reenactment. We could hire theater companies, and we could do a reenactment to sort of memorialize this history, so we don't lose the history of this place. And then somebody said, well, that's great, but that becomes like a historical artifact. It's not living. It's not alive. It doesn't. What does that mean for the future? And then someone said, let's not do a reenactment. Let's do a pre-enactment.
Oh, interesting.
And so they got local churches together with artists, a couple of theater companies, and the community residents. They also then started partnering with the local business owners and some newer business owners and real estate developers who had started to see the cheap land over here as a opportunity. They gathered, then they came together and said, look, we're going to come together, and together we're going to pre-enact our vision for what we want these neighborhoods to be for all of us.
Wow.
And so it's called Pre-enact Indy. And so for a couple of weekends, they take over. Joanna Taft did a great TED talk on this. You can look it up. You can go on her. I'm drawing a blank. I'm drawing a blank on her organization, the Art Center in Annapolis. I can try to remember that in a second. Yeah. Go ahead. So here's the thing. So you drive down this street, Bill, and as you're driving down, and they actually redirect traffic, so lots of people have to go through there. They've set up storefronts and billboards and they've integrated people from the neighborhood, and they are literally enacting the future they want. That's
awesome. That is really great. I love that word. Is it pre-enactment? Pre-enactment. Pre-enactment. I mean, because that's got kingdom of God all over it, right?
All over it.
So to use another phrase for shalom in the Christian language would be the kingdom of God, right? Where shalom happens because God's kingdom has come. And Christians, we are called to live in ways that pre-enact the kingdom of God for all people, right? We call that a foretaste. And so this pre-enactment, I think that's a pretty powerful concept. So thanks for sharing that story. Let's take some of the questions that have been coming in here, and there's some good ones. First one comes from Craig out there in San Francisco, or at least up in Northern California, talking about how emerging generations are finding the institutional church experience wanting at best, and wondering if you're seeing that as well as are there ways that the church needs to reform itself into ways that are just simpler, organic, relational, perhaps more nimble. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm totally seeing that for sure. I think that so yes, I'm seeing it. I also, I would put myself also reacting to some of that. So I think that's pretty widespread. So we have at the Ormond Center, we have what we call a studio on this question of if the fundamental point of congregational life is life together, shared life together in such a way that we are forming one another, worshiping together, communing together, and forming one another into more and more the likeness of Jesus Christ. If that's the fundamental purpose of life together, and then I would say in doing that formation, if that formation is good formation, it will be forming us in the image of Christ such that it will be a natural extension of that formation to be working for a mission for the world, for the mission to love our neighbor. And so we like to say, life together for the life of the world. Now the question is, what are the particular ways we should do that, right? And of
Yeah.
course, if you look through Christian history, we often fight each other and over just the ways, how much baptism and when, and how much communion and when, like all those kinds of things. So I'm certainly not a person to know what to say with respect to just how we should be doing it. But all I know is let's go back to the core thing. Let's go back to the core thing and say, what does it mean in this place, in this community, among these people right now, right here, to do life together, to worship, commune, do life together such that we're growing more and more into the image of God. And as we grow more and more to the image of God, we are more and more less about ourselves and more about the world around us.
That is very powerful. Did you come up with that? Life together for the life of the world? Is that yours?
I don't know. Who knows?
I might steal it. I like it.
Steal it.
No, that's
I'm
really
pretty sure.
powerful.
I'm pretty sure it's Bonhoeffer and Alexander Schmemann that I just smashed together.
I like it. That's really, really well said, Josh. I'm impressed.
Yeah.
No, that's great. That's great, because there's a very clear sort of there's a very clear both inward look as well as looking at my immediate community, but then there's also a very clear outward look that it must go in the direction of, right?
Yeah, I think it's a sign that things have gone wrong if you don't look outward.
Yeah. Here's another question. It's about segregation. It's a really important one. So, whether or not we know it, America is a profoundly segregated society in a lot of different ways, right? Along a lot of different lines. The person who's writing this question talks about the segregation of both racial, ethnic segregation, socioeconomic, as well as segregation within churches and so on. So the question is, where do you see meaningful relationships across lines of difference that are happening today? It seems to me that the segregation is one of the most challenging factors for the vision of Shalom. So where do you see that? Where do you see that being addressed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's start with the fact, just to reinforce the basic point. Our society is more sorted and segmented than it's ever been, in a lot of different ways. I mean, there's a great book on this called The Big Sort, by the way, if people are interested. So more and more we live, and it's not just geographical, it's also virtual. So more and more we live with people, work with people, interact with people virtually that are more and more just like us. So we live and work and play and worship in more or less homogeneous bubbles, and maybe are also echo chambers. So I think I don't have a simple answer to how do you break that. But one thing I can say, and this is a shout out to real estate developers, urban planners, community organizers, but anybody who can influence how we develop the built environment of our communities. And here's what I mean by this. If you build places that conform to that are, and how they're marketed, right, and who gets to live in these places by virtue of how they're priced and marketed, by virtue of how connected they are to other things and other parts of the community. We're just seeing so much disconnection in our communities. And actually some of this, not all of it, but I think a big part can be solved through different land use policies, different ways that we design and shape our communities, zoning and codes. People don't think about these things, but they actually play a huge sort of, they're not determinative, but they play an important factor in all of this. Yeah. Look, there's all this research out right now on when most of the things we're challenged with. Here's the big irony of the moment. Most of the big grand challenges of our moment require diverse, both cognitive and cultural diversity to solve them. And at the very moment when the challenges, the complex adaptive challenges of our time require teams and groups and networks that are culturally and cognitively diverse to solve them, we are least capable of doing it because for 50 years, we've had policies that one way or another have put us into our echo chambers and our bubbles. So as things, I'll give a concrete example of things that open up the circulation between people as an example. This is a built environment example, and then maybe I can talk more about sort of more just relational visions. The Atlanta Beltline. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's an old train. It's a ring, a railroad ring around the center of Atlanta. And if you've ever been to Atlanta, you know that traffic and congestion is a huge issue. So it was a master's student who realized that there was this old infrastructure. So they did a rails to trails project that's more or less done, I think, at this point, or almost done. And what you see happening is that's connecting neighborhoods just by pedestrian, bike traffic, other kinds of things. It's connecting neighborhoods that haven't been connected. There hasn't been circulation of people, right? Going through those places, for decades. And what you see popping up, wherever you connect circulation, you have life starts to grow.
Interesting.
You can also get conflict, by the way, but you also get life. Stuff starts happening. So what's growing up right now that these things are connected, right? Businesses are popping up. Yeah. Again, art's popping up. All kinds of things are popping up. And it's also then highlighting all the problems too, right? Because those interconnections then show us those problems. But I'm just giving you a kind of, again, the sheer physical connection opens up in a community the circulation of people and interrelationship that is powerful. Now, on a relational standpoint, I think this is where the church is really guilty. The church is as segregated. What Martin Luther King had that famous line years ago, and it's still true today, by and large. One of the most segregated times in America. America is what, 11 o'clock on Sunday morning. And it's not easy. It's not easy to figure out how to overcome that. And I have no magic bullets, but we're called to it.
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing's for sure, it's not going to happen without intentionality, right? It's not going to happen without personal intentionality as well as corporate intentionality. Like the forces of segregation and segmentation have been pervasive for a very, very, very long time and are so ingrained that in order to overcome them, it requires choice to be different and to live differently. We got another 6 minutes, Josh, and I've got two questions here that I want to make sure we get to. The first one is a combination of a couple of our questions. It's a harder one, and then the last one is a happy one. So how do you convince or invite folks who are threatened by shalom to want shalom, right? So that's one. Specifically, how do you convince and invite angry, separated people to want shalom? How do you make this attractive to folks who are not inclined towards it? And then the second one, it's related, is the sense from, there are some, I would say many Christians in our country feel like Christianity itself is under attack, right? And there's a self-preservation impulse, right? Which sometimes takes the form of advocating for religious freedom. What that means is freedom for me to practice my religion. Right. So there are Christians who feel threatened, perhaps, in this moment. There are others who are separated and don't want shalom. Like, what do we do? What do we do with folks who are not inclined to want this vision of shalom, however it is that they're getting there?
Yeah. So how do you change? Well, the Old Testament, there's, I'm going to say one thing and then I'll probably qualify it. What did the prophets do? I mean, none of those people wanted to hear about shalom, right? Very often, although sometimes they did, and they repented.
Yeah.
So I think we can, again, learn from that. But I also,
can I push that a little farther?
Yeah.
The prophets never seemed to take their cue based on what their audience wanted to hear, right?
No, they were responding to
Their
God.
their orientation was listen to what God has to say and say that, regardless of whether or not some people felt threatened by it or whether or not they wanted it. So, and it's also worth noting that we know how their story often ended up.
Right. But let me qualify that now.
All right, I'm ready for qualification.
But I think it's worth, I mean, that's not comfortable for me to say it. It's not comfortable for me to hear that, but that's what happened in the Old Testament. So I think it's worth thinking about. But I do think if from a more like, how do we bring people along, right? From that sense, from more of a, like, look, without justifying anything, there are lots of people feel embattled. Lots of people feel under threat for different reasons. And I don't think we don't have the time to argue about which ones are legitimate and so forth. But from a purely human standpoint, of people who are fearful, distrustful, uncertain about where they fit in the order of things, and who've hardened themselves in certain ways, it can't just be that we're chastising those people. It also has to be that there is we all suffer our own issues. We're all wounded healers.
Yeah.
And the question is, are there more winsome ways of calling our brothers and sisters to something more full, more abundant? And somebody like Brene Brown, I think, is interesting here, because what she's done is helped us understand that our vulnerability isn't something to be afraid of. It's the most deeply human thing, and that through our vulnerability, there's more abundance. There's things that we can get to. And I wonder if there is a way to call some people to say, look, don't be afraid. I think Jesus said that, not be afraid. And the path to fullness in life with me is through your vulnerability. Not trying to use force to resist it or hold back the tide. I don't know. I'm positing that, but it seems to me there's probably both a prophetic stance and there's then a more convivial stance as well.
Well, this connects to when you talked about, we talked about how the path to shalom, a first step is the introspection that helps me identify where I'm not doing that. Like that is a posture of humility. Similarly, that vulnerability is also a posture of humility, right? And it just makes me wonder about, if your answer to the question is, how then shall we live? And your answer is, bring shalom, right?
Live shalom.
Live shalom. Live shalom. That, and a really important first step there is my own work, my own soul work, in order to be the sort of person who can live shalom.
Yes.
Right.
So I would say Henry Nouwen has this great 3-part thing. He says, in order to do the outward journey, the work for your community or whatever, you have to also do the inward journey and the upward journey. And I think shalom, to live shalom, not bring shalom, God brings shalom. We live it. And you live it by taking all 3 journeys simultaneously.
Yeah. Last question, brother. I know we're at 1:30, but this is a good one. And so you can be brief on this and then we'll see you next time. Are you seeing any particular movements or dynamics in the American Christian landscape that are bringing you hope? If so, where are you seeing hope coming from the American Christian landscape?
Yeah. Oh, I am, for sure. It's there are days when it seems dimmer than others. Look, I could go on and on. I'm trying to keep this very simple. I think that there are, in every community I have ever been to, 2 things are true. It's always true that the church is underperforming what it's capable of doing, but it's always true that at the center of the most interesting, compelling, and inspiring things that I find happening on the ground, there are people of faith at the center of them. And some of these are small scale. There's no fanfare. Others are bigger and have scale, as they say. But everywhere I go, I see this, and I see these things bubbling up all over the place. So I think there's all kinds
Mm.
of, for those with eyes to see, as it were, there's all kinds of things happening. And I think there's also places we can go to find where they tend to be more often than not. But I think there's lots of things happening, and happy to expound on where and how and all of that. But
Yeah,
at a high
well,
level.
one thing I'm doing personally is I'm trying to not only orient so much on what I find disappointing about the church, right? But rather trying to articulate and then live what is so exciting about the gospel. And so I've put together a little thing called Essential Christianity, which is like, here's a vision of flourishing Christianity. And I'm trying to live that, and maybe we could try to live that together, right? We can spend a long time critiquing, but it's so good to spend even more of our energy, I think, creating. And as you say, living shalom.
Well, I was just going to say, Bill, you and this community is one of those bright spots for me.
Oh, that's
so there you go.
That's encouraging, Josh. Thank you. Well, it's good to do it together, brother. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of this today. This has been so very good. And we'll see you again at one of these sounding seminars or something else. Josh, thank you so very much. Encourage you to encourage us all to keep our eyes on the Ormond Center and the work that Josh is doing. And obviously always happy to have you all join Coracle for whatever it is we're up to. You're most welcome. So God, thank you very much for this call to live shalom and this call to pre-enact your kingdom where everyone and everything is blessed because you are that kind of God. Pray all this in your name. Amen. So shalom, everybody.
Shalom. Peace.
Shalom. All right. Thanks, Josh.